Hi, so in front of me today I've got the 13-inch M1 MacBook Pro from 2020 and the 14-inch M1 Pro MacBook Pro from 2021. Yes. So about a month ago, I decided to sell my Intel 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro because I'd heard all the rumors about the upcoming 14 and 16-inch MacBook Pros, and they were pretty much guaranteed. And I was like, you know what? I'm gonna sell it now, make the most amount of money I can from it in order to pay for a good chunk of these new ones. So the 13-inch 2020 M1 MacBook Pro was my interim laptop between selling my old MacBook Pro and waiting for these new ones to launch. So long story short, we had extended returns here in Melbourne because of the situation that we were in and retail wasn't open. One that I can't speak about on YouTube. Now, this isn't gonna be one of those really in-depth benchmark comparison videos. There are enough of those videos out there. So instead, I'm gonna be focusing more on the average everyday consumer if they're trying to decide, should I get a 13-inch MacBook Pro or should I get this new 14-inch MacBook Pro? Like, if the average Joe Blow were to walk into an Apple store, what differences would they notice between these two? One could definitely argue that if you don't care about the difference in performance between chips, if you don't know the difference between a CPU and a GPU, if you're pretty much just using this for media consumption, writing emails, general day-to-day workflow, and nothing too graphically intensive, then you should almost definitely just go with the M1 MacBook Pro, or even better probably, the M1 MacBook Air. But I mean, maybe you're someone who takes a lot of photos and just wants the option of being able to plug their SD card straight into their computer without having to use a dongle. Maybe you just like smaller bezels. Maybe you're someone who does all their media consumption. They watch all their TV shows and their movies on their MacBook, so they want to have the best screen possible. Or maybe you're just someone who has a lot of money and you don't care about paying a little bit extra, but you're still trying to decide which one is the right choice for you. If you are someone who, for whatever reason, is trying to decide between the 13-inch and the 14-inch, then welcome, this video is for you. If you haven't already noticed, my 13-inch is space gray and my 14-inch is silver. A lot of you guys commented on my unboxing video saying how much you really like the silver color and how few silver MacBook Pro videos there are out on YouTube, which sort of surprised me because to me, with this new black keywell and the black Apple logo in particular, that contrast is just so nice with the silver MacBook Pro. But I mean, variety is the spice of life, and many people make the world go round, whatever, you know what I mean. Let's start things off with the boxes. Yes, very exciting, the boxes. Where will I put these? So, of course, 13-inch, 14-inch, they are a very similar size, but not exactly the same size. Shocking, much like the actual laptops themselves. Of course, when you choose a silver color something compared to a space gray something, the MacBook Pro logos will match whatever color you choose. Yeah, that's what the boxes look like. You can already tell there's quite a big difference in the bezels. Now onto the big one, the most obvious one, the size. The 14-inch is of course a little bit bigger than the 13-inch, and that is of course to accommodate for the larger screen size. But apart from the screen size, Apple has of course done a massive design overhaul, the biggest that we have seen in years, practically forever. If you put them on top of each other, there is a fairly significant difference, but nothing, nothing too crazy. I'll also note now that the Apple logo on the new design is a lot bigger than the Apple logo on the old design. Now, just to be entirely accurate, the 13-inch model has a 13.3-inch screen, whereas the 14-inch model has a 14.2-inch screen. So there's a 0.9-inch difference between screen sizes. I've only been using the 14-inch for just over a week, but I can already say that looking at the 13-inch model now, those bezels just look absolutely enormous. It just looks so outdated already. I'm assuming that this will be the last 13-inch MacBook Pro and they're going to just have a more distinct difference between the Pro line and the Air line. But I do hope that when they update the Air line next year, probably, that they also shrink down the bezels on those as well. Of course, the trade-off for the much smaller bezels on the 14-inch model is that it now comes with a notch. Now, I don't hate the notch. I think I'm happy to pay that price in order to have smaller bezels. Do I think the notch could have been smaller than what it is? 100%. But do I think it ruins the whole thing, as some people seem to be thinking on the internet? No. And again, having used this for just over a week, I can safely say that I've hardly even noticed the notch. But also, to be fair, I use quite a dark background. I use this Apple background with, I don't know what it is, it's like a national park somewhere. So because of my dark background, the top bar for me is entirely black. And because of the new mini LED display, the blacks are really black. So the notch is essentially invisible. It just fully molds in and you do not see it at all. The only time that you really notice it is when you pass the mouse behind it and it disappears. Like, you have to look really closely at it to even see it unless you have a lighter background. So in practical day-to-day use, what does that 0.9 of an inch actually give you? How much more space does that actually translate to when you look at the screens side by side? Let's take a look at a website and let's just use Apple's 14-inch MacBook Pro buying page. So you can see here on the 13-inch model, it cuts off at the top of Magic Keyboard with Touch ID, whereas on the 14-inch model, it cuts off around about the USB power adapter. So there's an extra 2 and a bit lines of text here that you just wouldn't get on the 13-inch model. I think it makes a pretty big difference. If we scroll to this point, you can see that on the 13-inch model, you get the symbols here, but over on the 14-inch model, you also get a couple lines of text. So if we open up my unboxing video, for example, for whatever reason, the 14-inch version is looking super overexposed. To me, Premiere Pro can get really crowded really easily as it is, and having that extra 0.9 of an inch enables you to have a bit more space here, to have a larger preview window, etc. I'll flip them around here for a moment. So if you look at the actual Premiere Pro window on the 14-inch model, the actual window itself, before even looking at the top bar, sits higher than the entire screen sits on the 13-inch model. So like, it's a fairly significant difference. Does that make sense? I hope that made sense. So yeah, to me, the 13-inch just wasn't quite large enough, and I was really hoping that the 14-inch would be big enough, and I think that it is. It is getting almost the maximum amount of screen size you can get without getting so big that it becomes cumbersome to carry around with you. Another random note, I don't know if it's exactly the same height, but if you compare the 14-inch screen to the iPad Pro screen, which is very fingerprinty at the moment, so please forgive me, it either is or is almost exactly the same height. If I'm totally honest, I haven't noticed much of a difference between the 13 inches refresh rate and the new ProMotion 120 Hz refresh rate on the 14-inch model. Although the deeper blacks, which are made possible by the new mini LEDs, are very, very nice, and I have noticed that. Of course, there's nothing wrong with the screen on the 13-inch model. It's still a very, very nice screen. But when you compare it to the new XDR display on the 14 and 16-inch models, the blacks just seem sort of gray, blue, and they're very obviously not true blacks. They're just that dark, dark gray-blue color, whereas on the XDR displays, it looks really deep black. And just like what I said before about the notch blending into a black top bar, any blacks that you have on the screen blend seamlessly in with the bezels, and you really can't notice a distinction between the two. According to my measurements, the trackpad on the 14-inch model is slightly smaller than the trackpad on the 13-inch model. And when I say slightly, I measured 8 centimeters long on the 14-inch model and 8.2 centimeters long on the 13-inch model. So not a huge difference, but a difference. This is probably due to the keyboard being slightly larger on the 14-inch model in order to accommodate the full size row of function keys. That's right, no more touch bar. So if you were a fan of the touch bar, if you're not ready to say goodbye to it, then don't get the new 2021 MacBook Pros, stick with last year's M1 2020 MacBook Pro. Although I don't think there are that many people who love the touch bar enough for that to be their sole reason to stick with last year's MacBook Pro. I can honestly say that so far I have not missed the touch bar, although I do keep automatically reaching for the top right-hand corner in order to adjust the brightness when it's actually all the way over on the left now. Speaking of the keys, the 14 and the 16-inch models now come with a black keywell, which I think looks really, really nice. Again, especially with the silver color. If you're still unsure about it, I reckon just give it a little bit of time. You'll probably get used to it. I think it looks really, really good. The speaker grills are a bit wider on the 14-inch model than what they are on the 13-inch model. They are 10 holes across in breadth, I guess, on each side on the 13-inch model and 15 holes across on the 14-inch model. Yes, I counted. Now, technically, they are almost the same height with only a 0.01 centimeter difference between the two. You may be thinking, no way, the 14-inch is chunky as if it's only 0.01 centimeters taller than the 13-inch. That is not possible. Well, surprisingly, it is. Like, I think it's just the fact that this design is a lot more tapered. It's a trick and it makes it look a lot thinner than what it is because it's quite thin on the edges, whereas the 14-inch is just thick the whole way along. It doesn't actually take up that much more space, it just looks a lot heftier than this. However, when you actually put them next to each other, it seems like the 14-inch is significantly taller than the 13-inch. And somebody said in the comments from my unboxing video that if you put them the other way around, if you flip them like so, it may be that the feet are just that much taller in the 14 and 16-inch models that it makes the whole thing quite a bit wider, whereas the measurements are for the actual, almost at console, the actual computer without the feet. One thing that I noticed about having this more square, flat edge sort of design is that when you try to pick it up off a flat surface, such as your desk, you can do it quite easily with the 13-inch because, again, it tapers in. You can just one hand pick it up. No worries. Whereas with the 14-inch, I find that I usually have to use both hands, one to hold it in place and one to pick it up, because there's just not as much of a grip. See this? See this? Trying to pick it up, can't do it. You can sort of do it from the back because it's got the vent. But yeah, not so easy from the sides unless you use another hand to keep it in place while you do it. Whereas this one, no worries. That probably won't influence your decision whatsoever, but just so you're aware. If we look at the vents as well, the M1 MacBook Pro doesn't actually have air vents on the side. The 16-inch model had it, but the M1 13-inch does not. It does still have a gap here at the back for airflow. The 14-inch has one on each side, and it's quite a decent opening there as well. And then it's also got a bigger opening here at the back than what the 13-inch model does. I don't think that's really going to influence anyone's buying decisions. Also, interestingly, the MacBook Pro logo has been moved from the bottom bezel on the 13-inch model to engraved on the underside of the 14 and 16-inch models. I didn't mind the MacBook Pro logo being on the bottom bezel, but I also don't mind it being gone. I think that it also just helps to really have that smooth, black, bezel-free sort of vibe. You know what I mean? Onto the keyboard. I honestly thought that Apple had peaked with their keyboards with the 2019 16-inch MacBook Pro and this M1 MacBook Pro. I didn't think they could improve on these keys at all because they feel great. That was until I tried out this new keyboard and I didn't notice that much of a difference going from this to this, but having come back to this one after using this one for a week, it's not bad. This is still very good keyboard, but something about it just feels more mechanical and clicky. I think I used the term clickety clack. That's the only way that I can describe it. It's like, I don't know, whereas you probably can't tell anything from that. That's totally useless, but this one just feels a lot smoother. I don't know what it is. It feels so nice to type on. It's just a very smooth, clean experience. And going from that to this, you do notice a bit of a difference and it doesn't feel quite as nice. I think this has the perfect amount of resistance, the perfect amount of key clicking. This one's close, it's still really good, but this one is just, yes, this one, good. And now the thing that has everybody super excited, the ports. We'll start with MagSafe. Now at first when they announced this new MacBook Pro and they said that you can still charge using the Thunderbolt/USB-C ports, I thought I'm sticking to USB-C. Just because everything else that I use besides my iPhone uses USB-C for charging. And I also just like to be able to charge from the right-hand side of my MacBook because the cords come through my desk on the right-hand side. So I like to plug straight in instead of going around the back and plugging in on the left. But I tell you what, after clicking MagSafe in and out a couple times, the satisfaction of the magnets, the slight improvement in ease of just being able to magnetize it on and off instead of having to find the port and click in MagSafe saves like probably a second. I was sold. I'm like, well, never mind, I'm not using USB-C anymore. MagSafe all the way. So you get MagSafe on the 14-inch, but you do not, of course, get MagSafe on the 13-inch because the 13-inch only has 2 USB-Cs and a headphone jack. I almost forgot what it was called then. An AUX jack? I actually have to make a correction here for something that I said in my unboxing video, because I mentioned that if you want to fast charge, you can only do that through MagSafe 3, not through USB-C. And then somebody left a comment telling me that I was wrong. So thank you for telling me, because I 100% didn't realize. So on the 14-inch model, you can fast charge through the USB-C or MagSafe if you've got the 96 watt power adapter. But if you get the 16-inch model, you can apparently only charge through MagSafe 3. So if you do pick up the binned base 14-inch MacBook Pro, just be aware that it comes with a 67 watt power adapter, which you cannot use for fast charging. However, you can pay an extra, I think it's $20 American, to upgrade to a 96 watt power adapter instead. In terms of the other ports, I haven't actually used the SD card slot or the HDMI port yet. However, I am happy to be able to do away with this nonsense and not have to use that on the occasion that I do need a HDMI or an SD card slot. I mean, I'll actually still keep this for USB-A when I occasionally need to use something that uses USB-A. However, if you don't own a dongle yet and you still want to use USB-A, you can get a much smaller little adapter now, because that's probably the only thing that you'll need an adapter for this MacBook Pro. Then we've got the headphone jack, which I probably don't really need to talk about. And we've got 3 USB-C/Thunderbolt ports still, which I feel like is a really good amount, and I'm really happy that they're on both sides still, because again, if you want to charge your MacBook from the opposite side, you can still do that via USB-C in this USB-C port. I've said this in multiple other videos, but 2 USB-C ports on a MacBook Pro on a Pro machine is a joke, and they're right next to each other. So if you want to plug in something big, you have to unplug the power one. Like, nah, dumb. So if it wasn't for the fact that I wanted a bigger screen, if I was happy with the 13.3-inch screen, I still wouldn't have kept the M1, purely for the fact that 2 USB-C ports is a joke. Moving on. Now that we're living in the age of working from home, how's that new 1080p webcam? Finally, compared to the 720p webcam in the older models that's been in there for bloody forever. How's the new microphone? Let's do a comparison. Hi, this is the new built-in camera and microphone on the new 2021 14-inch MacBook Pro. And this is the built-in camera and microphone on the 2020 13-inch MacBook Pro. I think you can tell there's a little bit of a difference. To wrap it all up, 2 little random observations. Firstly, the hinge joint on the 14-inch model seems to be just a bit smoother, a bit easier to open than what it is on the 13-inch model. I mean, they both open great, they both feel really sturdy. It's just that the 14-inch model, yeah, is just a bit more smooth sailing. I mean, it does shake around if I do this, but who's gonna be doing that? And then finally, the last observation is that the 14-inch, I find, actually has less grip on surfaces. Maybe it's because the feet are actually really flat this time. Even though they're higher, they're flatter. Whereas these ones are, again, more like rounded. This seems to grip a bit better than what this one does. Not a huge deal, just something I noticed. But those are all the things that I can think of for the moment without going into actual chip performance. So if you're trying to decide which MacBook Pro model you want to buy, the M1 versions or the M1 Pro/M1 Max versions, then I hope this video was helpful for you. In Australia, at least, the base 14-inch model will set you back an extra $1,100 than what the base 13-inch model will. So really decide beforehand whether that increased screen size, the reduced bezels, the improved webcam, improved speakers, improved microphone, I reckon improved keyboard, the extra ports, whether they are worth the extra money. To me, they definitely are. But that being said, if you're on more of a budget, then the M1 MacBook Pro is still a very, very capable machine. And if you're not really dependent on graphics for your workflow, then you'll probably get by with this just fine. For a while now, I think Apple sort of had this confusing overlap where the Airs and the Pros weren't actually that different, but now I think the Pros are definitely living up to their names. And in my opinion, they're worth the extra money. I'm not going to go into specs, but I will say that for almost everyone, you probably won't need the M1 Max chips unless you're doing some really graphically intensive stuff, you'll probably get by just fine with either the M1 or the M1 Pro chips. So I hope this video was helpful for you. If it was, please don't forget to give me a thumbs up because it helps the YouTube algorithm bless me with more views, gets me closer to living a YouTube life instead of living a corporate hell life. Joking, but only a little bit. If you want to see more from me, you can click on my face to subscribe to my channel. You can click on another video to watch another video from me, something Apple related, no doubt. And I'll see you next time. Goodbye.